Hello and welcome to Steve McDonald's Arts and Crafts. Today what I'm going to be showing is how I sand something that has an imperfection in, or I need something removed, then sand it to get a really good shine, and then do a pour on something to bring that shine back up to a gloss. So a lot of this video will be speeded up because I'm sure you don't want to see just me sitting here sanding stuff. And what I'm going to be sanding is, first of all, I'm going to be sanding the face of this coaster because I don't know if you can see, but there's a dent in it there, and I don't want that dent there. And the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing this shape because it's quite dull in some of the areas, and I want to show you how to sand and get a shine back on something that's not a normal flat surface. Now, everything that I'm doing on this you can also do on a large pour, and I will talk about that as I go ahead. So if you've got a problem with a pour picture, if it's got a mark in it, or if it's got a hair in it or something that you want to get rid of, then I'm going to show you that really will work with this as well. And what I'm going to be using today is I'm going to be using a variety of sandpapers. So I'm going to be going down from 120, which is quite a coarse, to 220, to 320, to 600, 800, 1200, 1500, 2000, 2500, and 3000. I will then be going over it with my rubbing compound as well, and then I also have some polishing compound for plastics and acrylics that I find works really well, and I'll be putting that on these little Dremel tools and going over it with my Dremel. But if you don't have a Dremel, it's not a problem, because you can use a cloth as well, a nice soft cloth, and that'll do it as well, but it'll just take a little bit longer. Everything that I use today as well I will put in the description, so you can find what I've used or something similar. Okay, so without too much of ado, let's get on. Now, most of this video I will be wearing a mask because obviously I don't want the dust particles to be getting in my lungs, so I will be doing a voiceover to this after it's finished recording. And also I'm working on the back of a silicone mat, and I will be using water to dampen down the sandpaper, because not only do I find that helps with getting a smoother finish, but it also prevents dust getting up and around in my studio. So from here on, I'm doing a voiceover because obviously, as I said, I was wearing that mask. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting a little bit of pressure on the thing that I'm sanding, but I'm not putting too much pressure on it. The other important thing is, as you saw me do just now, is to make sure that in between each one of the sanding sheets that you clean up and wash it with clean water, because what you don't want to have left is the grit from the previous sanding sheet scratching the thing that you're actually sanding down and trying to polish, because if not, it will leave scratches and it will affect the polish. I've also paused this in each time to let you know which grit of sandpaper I'm moving over to. So now I'm on the 800 grit sandpaper. I'm making sure it's wet, and I'm putting some even pressure on that as I'm sanding it, and then I'm going over the top to make sure that I don't miss out anything. So I'm now moved up to the 1000 grit, and again I'm seeing it, and as you can see the water is a little bit cloudy, and that is because of the dust particles that are being picked up, and again I cleaned it nicely before moving on. So I have two separate pots of water. I have a pot of water that I rinse it off in, and a pot of water that I use to put on the actual sandpaper itself to ensure that that hasn't got any grit in it. And I also use a clean paper towel each time to make sure that I've washed down my surface area. It really, really is important to do that. So now we're getting rid of all those scratch marks by going up to the 2500 grit sandpaper, and what you'll see is this will get rid of most of the actual scratch marks on it. And if you're using this on a pour that you've done, you don't need to sand or out the whole picture. You just need to sand out around a little bit, probably the size of this coaster, around what you want to remove. So now I'm using a rubbing compound, and I will use my Dremel with this, and it did get everywhere. And that will actually really, really start to polish that up. And as you can see, the shine and the sheen is starting to come back into this now. And I find I don't need to go up to higher grit sandpapers. Now I'm using what I would consider a plastic polish. It's made for plastics. And again, I'm going over that with a clean Dremel tool. And it has now cleaned that up nicely. So there we go. We've now gone from all those grits, and we've now polished it, and it's back to being really, really shiny. And as you can see, that dent has gone, which is great. So it is a little bit time consuming, but actually if you're listening to some music like I was, then ultimately the time goes really well. And if you want to rescue a piece that you absolutely love, this is a really good way of doing it. So the next step method I'm going to show you is how to make something shiny again after if it's gone dull, or after you've given it a bit of a sanding. And you know, something like this would take forever to sand all these little facets, but as you can see, it's not very shiny at all. So the first thing I shall do is I shall give it a good clean and wash to make sure it's dust free under a little bit of very, very lightly warm, so very just tepid water with a little bit of soap in it, and give it a wash. So I've given this a really good wash now, and the reason I give it a wash is there's probably dust or bits and pieces on it that I don't want to be in the resin as I'm coating it. Now, as you can see, this isn't majorly damaged, but it does need a coat on it because it has not got its shine here. So I could now go over this with my polishing compound for acrylics with that little brush, and that probably would bring quite a bit of shine up to it. But the other thing I have noticed with this one is there are a couple of little bubble holes. I'm not sure if you can see it in there. That actually, I want those to be filled. I don't want them to be there. So coating it in resin is also going to help. Now, obviously, I'm not bothered about the bottom of this because it's going to be standing up anyway. Although, what I will do is I will ensure that that bottom is as protected as I can. So what I'm going to actually do on that bottom is I'm going to put a bit of tape on it, because the bottom is quite shiny, full of little tiny bubbles that I really should sand that. So I'm going to put a bit of tape on that bottom. As you can see, I've put a bit of tape on that bottom as well, and that'll help me get a much better cleaner edge. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that on there, and I'm going to mix up not casting resin, but a little bit of pouring resin to go over that. So I've mixed my resin up now, and I let it sit for about, I don't know, perhaps 10 minutes. So it's slightly thicker. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gently pour this over here. Now, what you want to make sure is that you really don't want too much. Okay? Because too much resin and it's going to end up looking lumpy, possibly, or it's going to be, it's just going to fall off the actual thing, run off in runs. And what I do is I like to take this wooden stick And you can use a paintbrush, but to be honest, I get fed up going through all the paintbrushes. And I tell you who else has done a brilliant video on this sort of thing as well, is Miriam from Miriam's Nature. So please check out her channel, because she did one a couple of weeks ago on how to get rid of bits in a coaster that you don't want. And it's a really, really good video. But I want to show this as slightly different. So I'm making sure that all the areas are covered and that there's no runs or drips. And this is still liquidy enough to be able to find its own level once it's on the actual sculpture or ornament that you're doing. There we go. And just lightly go over. Let the actual wooden stick do the work rather than you pushing into it, because if not, what you'll find you'll be doing... It would have been easier if I'd have done this on my Lazy Susan, so I could have actually turned it around rather than doing this. But I didn't think about that to start with. And just make sure it's all well coated, all the facets, all the sides are well coated. And this works just as well on any shape I've found, even an egg shape. Now, if you've got a lathe, then there are some videos on how to do it if you've got a lathe, and it's a lot quicker with the sanding and everything, but I don't have one of those, so I have to do it the way that I've found a way of doing it that actually works for me. Okay, so all those sides are now covered, I believe. I will give it a few minutes and make sure that it's all okay, and then I shall just cover it and leave it for probably 24 hours before I come back to it. So this is now what it looks like after 24 hours, and as you can see, it's got a really nice shine all over it, and it's covered up really well. So I'm really pleased with this and how it's come out. What's really useful about this method is if you haven't got the time to sit and do each one of the facets and sand them through all the grits, by doing a pour over it, you can get a really good effect that's nice and shiny. And as soon as I took the tape off the bottom, there were no drips on it at all, and it was lovely and smooth. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and share this video as much as you can to help my channel grow. Bye.